A key Russian general now dead after a bomb exploded today outside of his Moscow home. He was in charge of the military's nuclear, biological, and chemical protection forces. NTD's international correspondent Ariane Pazdar has what we know so far.
Police are at the scene of an explosion which shocked Moscow on Tuesday. This video shows Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov and his assistant leave their apartment building on Tuesday morning. That's when a bomb exploded, killing both of them. The explosion scared some residents living in the area.
My wife and I woke up from a loud explosion. At first, we thought it was a drone. I looked out the window, but I didn't see anything. I only heard it.
The bomb used in Tuesday's attack was reportedly hidden in a scooter and triggered remotely. Images from the scene showed shattered windows and damaged brickwork. Russia's top investigator is now looking into the case.
The incident has been classified as a terrorist act, murder, as well as illegal arms and ammunition trafficking.
Kirillov's death comes just one day after Ukraine issued criminal charges against him. Ukraine accused him of directing the use of banned chemical weapons. Kyiv reports almost 5,000 occasions when Russia used chemical weapons on the battlefield in Ukraine. The Kremlin is now blaming the explosion on Kyiv.
We must do everything to destroy the patrons who are in Kyiv. These patrons are also known. This is the military political leadership of Ukraine.
The State Department was asked if the general was a legitimate target, if the killing was indeed planned by Ukraine.
And obviously, he was a general who was involved in a number of atrocities. He was involved in the use of chemical weapons against Ukrainian military. It's something the United States has publicly assessed before.
But the State Department added that the U.S. was not informed about the explosion before it happened. And the Pentagon said this when asked about the alleged assassination plot.
Do not support or enable those kinds of activities. Seen the reports. Don't really have any information to provide.
Ukraine has not officially confirmed reports saying that Kyiv is behind the explosion. Ariane Pazdar, NTD News.
The top Russian general who was killed by Ukraine's bomb attack in Moscow earlier today was in charge of the nuclear, biological, and chemical forces, something only Russia and China have in operation. Earlier, I discussed Russia's war in Ukraine with Claire Lopez, former operations officer with the CIA. Claire Lopez, thank you so much for sitting down with us.
Glad to be with you again. Thank you.
It's great to have you with us, Claire. Let's start with Russia's relationship with Syria. With Assad now gone, Russian forces seem to be negotiating with former rebel groups in that country. What does Russia hope to get out of this?
Well, as we know, Steve, Russia has at least a couple of military bases in Syria that it would like to hang on to. One is the naval base at Tartus, and another is an air base at Latakia, further up the coast north of Tartus. It's not at all clear that they are going to be allowed to keep possession of those bases, which are very valuable to Russia in that particular location. Warm water port, for the naval base. And so it's not clear where those negotiations will go with HTS, that is Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that is basically taken over after the Bashar al-Assad regime fell.
President-elect Trump just recently was asked about the possibility of asking Putin to have Assad, to give Assad up, essentially. What would be the benefit in that? Trump responded something along the lines like he hadn't thought about it, sort of dismissed it. Is that something based on, the human rights abuses and the war crimes to hold him accountable that we should be looking for?
Well, I mean, I don't expect the Moscow regime of Vladimir Putin to give up Bashar al-Assad. He, with his family, wife and children, fled there earlier in December. This is 2024. Putin himself, will recall, is under a wanted notice out of the ICC, the International Criminal Court at The Hague. So I guess they make good company there in Moscow.
So Syria's new government is reaching out to global powers, including Russia, facing questions about its future alliances. What does Russia really have to offer them?
Well, what Russia used to have to offer was its military presence in the country, as we talked about when Putin supported Bashar al-Assad in the earlier rebel uprising. But that's not the case anymore. Russia has been otherwise occupied in its invasion of Ukraine. And there in what used to be called Syria, its very bases there, you know, as we mentioned, Tartus and Latakia, not at all certain that they may be able to keep those. And without those, I don't know what the Russians would have to offer, in particular to the new regime, if you will, in Damascus, led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is a Turkish-backed rebel group.
Turning our attention right now to the war in Ukraine, talk to us about the significance of Ukraine occupying land in Russia's Kursk region. How big of a gain might this be? And this is actually the first time Russian territory has been occupied since World War II. How does this challenge Russia's military force?
Right. So this incursion by the Ukrainian forces into Kursk Oblast, that is an oblast or kind of a province, right? In the southern and westernmost part of Russia, bordering up against Ukraine. And the Ukrainian forces invaded there back in August of this year, 2024. And they conquered a fair amount of territory there and still occupy territory there. And what that does for Ukraine is enables them to counter some of the closest to Ukraine Russian military bases, missile launch sites, ammo depots, and that sort of thing that the Russians have been using against Ukraine. And so the advantage for Ukraine in holding that territory is to be able to deter Russians' efforts to use that as a base, a launching base for invasion, for attack against Ukraine. We are hearing now, of course, that the Russians, running out of manpower, have prevailed upon Kim Jong-un of North Korea to send, I don't know how many, some tens of thousands, I guess, of his troops, which are reportedly now in Kursk Oblast. Whether they've actually joined the fight yet or not quite certain, but they're apparently there.
There are reportedly now language barriers and coordination issues between Russian troops and North Korean troops. But how could North Korea's support for Russia affect international relations, especially when we see President-elect Trump referencing his previous, what he calls a good relationship, not so good in the beginning, with the now dictator Kim Jong-un?
Yeah, I don't think that when Trump speaks about that exchange, that trip that Trump took to North Korea, I don't think he's talking about Kim Jong-un in a favorable way. What he's saying instead is that as the President of the United States, it's important that he not only know and get to understand the mental thinking of these rogue leaders like Kim Jong-un or like Vladimir Putin himself, but that is done through personal interaction. And I think that's what he means when he talks about a relationship with either, be it Kim Jong-un or Vladimir Putin, that he needs to understand where they're coming from, how they think, and therefore, in a way, be able better to formulate U.S. policy vis-a-vis them and those regimes.
Similarly, to your point in that press conference earlier, the issue of Xi Jinping, China's dictator, came up. And it's really hard to make ones and twos of Trump's real opinion of Xi Jinping. In one breath, he says that he's a very smart man, but at the same time, he also said that COVID-19 was a bridge too far. Mm-hmm. What do you think Trump's strategy is when he references both sides here when he talks about China? Yeah,
so once again, I think that when President Trump speaks about Xi Jinping or any other of these leaders we're mentioning, he is talking about understanding that leader in that regime, in that country, so as better to formulate U.S. policy. When he talks about Xi Jinping as being super smart, yeah, you don't get to be the leader of 1.2 or 4 or whatever billion people without having, something on the ball intellectually. And Xi Jinping has risen to the top of that heap. It doesn't mean that Trump approves of him or favors him or likes him even. It means that they had conversations that enabled President Trump to get to know Xi Jinping better. And again, that would help President Trump now in his second term coming up to better formulate policy vis-a-vis China, including, I would say, against China's biological weapons program, which I hope gets addressed finally, a program of civilian military fusion, as they call it, between the Chinese Communist Party and the PLA, People's Liberation Army. And that's where the SARS-CoV-2 virus came from.
And I don't think that's something we should just brush over that quickly. Just for background, Claire, when you talk about a biological weapons program, the United States, from my understanding, doesn't even have this. Yet,
not now. We used to.
Yet China currently does.
Yes, absolutely. So does Russia. So did Damascus. Why did Israeli forces in the recent past days, week, target the SSRI, Syrian Scientific Research Institute, and its facilities in and around Damascus and the rest of Syria? Because those were places where Damascus's regime under Bashar al-Assad worked together with North Korea, with Russia, with China on biological and chemical weapons programs.
Claire, lastly, Putin claims the West is pushing Russia further and further away, specifically when it comes to NATO and U.S. missile deployments in Europe. Talk to us about the substance behind such a comment, and how could these tensions influence future military planning?
Well, I would hope that there would be an understanding that concerns about a Ukraine membership in NATO had absolutely nothing to do with Putin's invasion of Ukraine back in February of 2022. Instead, as we read statements by Russian leadership, Vladimir Putin, Sergei Lavrov, Dmitry Medvedev, Alexander Dugin, in translation, of course, which are on the internet, we find that the excuse of concern about Ukraine's desire, there is a desire to one day, someday in the far future, accede to membership in NATO, is not anything that had to do with the invasion of 22. Instead, as those Russian leadership figures said, and say repeatedly, the invasion was about keeping Ukraine from moving any further westward in its inclinations, in its policies, and that Russia, the current leadership in Moscow, considers Ukraine to have absolutely no rights to be an independent sovereign nation, and that it must be reabsorbed into a once and future Soviet Union or Russian Empire even.
Claire Lopez, always very fascinating insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
House lawmakers have released their plan for government funding, which expires this Friday. It includes around $100 billion in disaster relief, $10 billion in aid for farmers, also includes restrictions on investments in China, which were dropped from the defense authorization bill last week. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez brings us more from Capitol Hill.
CR is coming together. Bipartisan work is ongoing. We're almost there. We worked really hard to achieve consensus on a bill that responsibly funds the government into March of next year. It'll go to March 14.
That was Speaker of the House Mike Johnson during this year's last House Republican press conference. And with less than 4 days until government funding expires, Speaker Johnson knows that it will be an uphill battle to whip Republican votes.
But here we are today on Tuesday. We haven't seen any bill text. We're supposed to fly out on Thursday. We've had a long time to deal with it. So it's the same, basically same pattern of behavior.
The holdup in negotiations, according to Speaker Johnson, is the nearly $100 billion in disaster relief requested by President Biden.
It was intended to be, and it was until recent days, a very simple, very clean CR, stopgap funding measure to get us into next year when we have unified government, or adding to this a disaster relief package, and that's critically important. Also important is the devastation that is being faced by our farming community.
On Tuesday, Congresswoman Victoria Spart announced that she will no longer caucus with House Republicans, signaling an opposition to the current House Republican leadership. On a statement, Congresswoman Victoria Spart said that our country is on a fiscal collision course and it will take some courage and structural changes in Congress to challenge the status quo, which is not happening. As a serious legislator and finance professional, not a clown, I am not going to continue being involved in circuses. On the Democratic side, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said that negotiations are still ongoing for a continuing resolution. Also on Tuesday, House Democrats voted for their committee assignments, and Congressman Jerry Connolly defeated Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to be the new ranking member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman Connolly said on a statement that, "I promise the American people that our committee Democrats will be a beacon of truth and prepared from day one to counter Republican gaslighting." Congressman Jerry Connolly is replacing Congressman Jamie Raskin as the ranking member in the House Oversight Committee, and Jamie Raskin is moving over to become the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
The man accused of shooting United Healthcare executive Brian Thompson in Midtown Manhattan is now facing 11 charges, including murder as an act of terrorism. Police in Altoona, Pennsylvania, apprehended Luigi Mangione following a 5-day manhunt. He's currently being held on gun charges in Pennsylvania. The Manhattan District Attorney is now seeking his extradition back to New York. Turning now to the aftermath of the Madison school shooting, authorities today saying the motive appears to be, quote, a combination of factors. This comes as officials are now investigating her online activity. On Monday, 15-year-old student Natalie Ruppnow opened fire at a private Christian school in Madison, Wisconsin, before committing suicide. Authorities said a teacher and student were killed in the shooting, along with 6 others wounded. That includes 2 victims still in critical condition. So far, the shooter's motive remains unknown, but police say there were no specific targets. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.